welcome. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Or, I might show up at your door. I'm just here to share some creepy stories, so sit back and enjoy. Disclaimer: the content presented in the video is purely for entertainment purposes only. The theories and stories discussed in this video are speculative and are not supported by any evidence or proof. Viewer discretion is advised. I was eating breakfast when the first alert came through. The emergency tone blared from my phone, an ear-piercing screech that made me flinch and nearly drop my coffee. Annoyed, I grabbed the device and swiped at the screen, expecting the usual weather warning or missing person alert. But instead, the message was something I had never seen before. Emergency alert. Do not approach unusually quiet areas. Avoid locations where all sound has completely disappeared. If you experience an abrupt loss of ambient noise, evacuate immediately. Await further instruction. I stared at the words for a long moment, rereading them. Unusually quiet areas? What the hell was that supposed to mean? I sipped my coffee, scrolling through social media for any clues. Nothing. No trending hashtags. No news updates. Just people posting about their daily routines, completely unaware of the bizarre warning. I figured it was some kind of glitch. Maybe an old test message got sent out by accident. I worked for the city's maintenance department, mostly dealing with power grids, streetlights, and underground tunnel inspections. If something serious was happening, we'd have been briefed. My radio crackled to life on the kitchen counter. Attention all field personnel. My supervisor's voice came through, slightly distorted. If you're on duty today, check in at the office before heading to any assignments. Got some unusual reports we need to go over. Dispatch out. I sighed and finished my coffee, already dreading whatever new mess had popped up overnight. Probably just another blackout or a busted transformer. The first report. By the time I arrived at the maintenance office, the place was buzzing. Guys from different crews stood around in small groups, muttering to each other. I spotted my coworker, Dave, leaning against the wall with a deep frown. "Morning," I said, setting my gear down. "What's going on? You see that alert?" Dave asked, rubbing his unshaven jaw. "Yeah, weird, right?" He let out a dry chuckle. "You have no idea. We got 3 reports overnight about, I don't even know how to describe it. Places going completely silent." I raised an eyebrow. Silent how? Like no sound at all. No wind, no echo, no nothing. That made me pause. Cities are never truly silent. Even in the dead of night, there's always something. Distant traffic, buzzing streetlights, the hum of power lines. The idea of a place where all noise just stopped. It unsettled me. "They're saying people walked into these places and felt sick," Dave continued, "like disoriented, dizzy. Then they left and everything was fine again." I frowned. "That doesn't make sense." "Nope," Dave agreed. "And guess what? One of the reports was from a power station near Franklin Avenue. Dispatch wants us to check it out." I sighed. "Of course they do. The power station." We arrived at the Franklin Power Substation around 9:30 a.m. It was an old facility, mostly automated, but we still had to check in every so often to make sure everything was running smoothly. The first thing I noticed was how normal everything seemed. Birds chirped in the distance. A car rumbled past on the street. I could hear the faint hum of electricity from the transformers. Nothing unusual. Dave and I stepped inside the fence perimeter and made our way to the control shed. "There's no way this place was one of the silent zones," I muttered. "Something's off about the reports." Dave didn't respond. He had stopped walking, his expression tight. "What?" I asked. He pointed ahead. "That." I followed his gaze and felt my stomach drop. Near the back of the lot, about 20 feet from the main transformer, there was a small alleyway between the substation fence and an adjacent warehouse. And it was wrong. I don't know how to describe it exactly. It looked normal, gray concrete, a few scattered pieces of trash, but something about it felt off. I realized why a second later. It was quiet. Too quiet. the hum of the power station, the faint city noise in the background. It all faded the closer I got to that alleyway. The air felt thick, like stepping into a vacuum. A pressure built in my ears, like I was descending deep underwater. Dave grabbed my arm. "Dude, don't." I hesitated, my foot hovering just inches from the invisible threshold. My instincts screamed at me to stop. I swallowed hard and took a step back. Immediately, the sound rushed back. The distant traffic, the hum of power, even the soft rustle of wind. It was like stepping out of a sealed room. "Holy shit," I whispered. Dave exhaled. "Yeah." We stood there for a long moment, neither of us sure what to do. This wasn't something we were trained for. Then my radio crackled. "All field teams, be advised, new emergency protocol has been issued. Do not, under any circumstances, enter confirmed silent zones. Avoid perimeter breaches. Await further instructions." I exchanged a glance with Dave. His face was pale. "I think we should go," he said. I didn't argue. The second alert. By the time we got back to the office, another emergency alert had been issued. Emergency alert update. Silent zones confirmed in multiple locations. Do not approach. If you experience an abrupt loss of all sound, retreat immediately. Await further government instruction. More and more people were talking about it now. Social media was blowing up with stories. Drivers who turned down the wrong street and suddenly couldn't hear their own engine. Joggers who ran through an underpass and found themselves in a dead zone of absolute silence. And then, the strangest post of all, a woman claimed her brother had stepped into one of these silent places. Only for a few seconds. When he came back, he wouldn't talk. He just sat there, staring at the floor. And when he finally did open his mouth, his voice wasn't his anymore. The emergency alert had spread like wildfire by the time I got home. Every social media platform was flooded with posts. Videos of people demonstrating the eerie effect of the silent zones. Blurry pictures of empty streets with captions like, "It was normal 1 second, then nothing," and "Felt like my ears just stopped working." Some were clearly faked, clout chasers trying to turn the panic into a joke. But others felt real. News stations finally picked up the story by the evening, but they weren't saying much, just repeating the same government warnings. Do not approach quiet areas. If you find yourself in a completely silent location, evacuate immediately. No explanation, no scientific breakdown, just don't go near them. I tried to sleep that night, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw that alleyway again. The unnatural stillness. The way sound seemed to collapse around it. The heavy feeling in my gut that told me we had barely scratched the surface of something wrong. The city starts changing. The next morning, another update came through. Emergency alert. Be advised, silent zones are growing. New locations reported nationwide. Federal response teams en route. I read the words, my stomach twisting. Nationwide, this wasn't just my city. These things, whatever they were appearing all over. Dave called me an hour later. "Dude, you watching the news?" His voice was tense, rushed. I grabbed the remote and turned on the TV. The screen flickered to a breaking news segment. Footage from a traffic helicopter circling an empty neighborhood. Authorities have completely sealed off a 5-block radius in downtown Chicago. The anchor was saying, residents are being evacuated due to an ongoing emergency. Though details remain unclear, the footage zoomed in. The streets were deserted. No cars, no pedestrians. The wind ruffled trees, but it was wrong. Even through the TV, I could tell something wasn't right. Officials have not provided an explanation for these increasing quarantine zones. The screen glitched. For just a second, the image distorted, flickering with static. Then the camera cut out, just dead air, silence. Then the feed abruptly switched to another reporter. No one acknowledged what had just happened. Dave exhaled. "You see that?" "Yeah," I muttered. "I saw it." Neither of us spoke for a moment. Then Dave said, "I need to check something out. You coming?" Back to the alley. We drove in silence. Neither of us wanted to admit we were doing exactly what the government said not to do. By the time we reached the power station, I already felt uneasy. Something was different. I rolled down the window slightly. Birds chirped. The distant hum of traffic filled the air. Normal city sounds, but the closer we got, the quieter it became. We parked down the street. I stepped out, feeling the hairs on my arms rise. No wind, no car engines, no sound at all. Dave swallowed hard. It's worse than yesterday, I nodded. The silence bled out of the alley now, creeping toward the main street. Like a disease spreading outward, Dave pulled out his phone, tapping the record button. Let's just get some footage, and a sharp static noise crackled from his speaker. We both froze. Is that? I started, but then the static stopped, and something else came through. A whisper, indistinct, garbled, like a voice deep underwater. Dave's hands trembled as he turned up the volume. The whisper grew louder, warping, shifting, like it was trying to form words but couldn't quite manage. Then suddenly, don't. The single word was clear, sharp. We both took a step back. Dave fumbled to shut off the recording, his breathing ragged. We need to go, I whispered. He nodded. Yeah, right now. We turned and hurried back to the truck, every instinct screaming at us to leave. But just as I reached the door handle, I heard it, a noise from behind us. Not a voice, not a whisper, a footstep, slow, deliberate. I turned my head just enough to see a shadow just past the alley's edge, tall, unmoving, and watching the escape. Dave yanked the door open. We scrambled inside and slammed the locks shut, our breaths coming fast. I turned the key. The truck didn't start. Come on, I muttered, twisting the ignition again. Nothing. Then another footstep, closer. A deep, horrible pressure built in my ears, a physical weight pressing down on my skull. Dave clutched his head. Jesus Christ, my vision blurred. The dashboard warped like heat waves on pavement. For one terrible second, I swore I heard something breathing just outside the window. Then the truck roared to life. I slammed my foot on the gas. The tires screeched, the engine howled, and we tore down the street, away from that terrible, crushing silence. The moment we crossed a few blocks, the noise returned in full force. The world felt real again. I glanced in the rearview mirror. The alleyway was still there, still empty, but something deep in my gut told me it wasn't empty at all. The third alert. That night, another emergency alert went out. Emergency alert update. Silent zones confirmed to be expanding unpredictably. New federal orders in place. Do not attempt to enter these areas. All missing persons associated with silent zones are presumed unrecoverable. I read that last line twice. Unrecoverable. That wasn't normal government phrasing. That meant they weren't just gone. They weren't people anymore. I turned off my phone and sat in the dark. Outside, in the distance, the city hummed with life. But all I could think about was the fact that somewhere out there, the silence was growing. I didn't go to work the next day. Neither did Dave. I called in sick, which was technically a lie, but I felt sick. Not in a physical way, but in the way where your body knows something is wrong. And the worst part? No one at work even questioned it, because I wasn't the only one staying home. The silence spreads. The latest government updates were vague. They weren't calling it a quarantine, but that's exactly what it was. More roadblocks were popping up. More areas getting cordoned off. The public transit system in certain parts of the city shut down entirely, with zero explanation. At first, people assumed it was some kind of military drill. Then the rumors started. A video surfaced online of a highway overpass. It was filmed from a distance, through a shaky phone camera. The whole stretch of road was empty. Not a single car. No pedestrians. Nothing. Then something moved. Not a person. Not an animal. Just a shape. A shifting distortion in the middle of the road, like the air itself was warping. The moment it drifted too close to the person filming, the video cut out. The post was deleted minutes later, but not before thousands of people saw it. The police scanner. I spent most of the morning staring at my laptop, refreshing news feeds, looking for answers, but the government wasn't saying anything beyond their basic warnings. I wanted real information, so I pulled out my police scanner. It was an old habit. I used to listen to it during blackouts or severe storms, just to hear what emergency crews were actually dealing with. I turned it on and started cycling through channels. Most of it was normal city chatter. Reports of minor car accidents, shoplifting, noise complaints. Then a distorted voice crackled through. "Dispatch, this is Unit 24. We have a confirmed silent zone at." The signal warped. For a second, all I could hear was static. Then, no movement, but something's there. It's just standing. A long pause. Then another voice, barely above a whisper. "It's looking at us." Silence. Then, screech. A high-pitched screech blasted through the speakers. I ripped off my headphones, heart pounding. When I put them back on, the channel was dead. Nothing but empty static. Dave's theory. I needed to talk to Dave. I called him. He picked up on the second ring. "You're hearing this shit, right?" I asked. He exhaled. "Yeah." Something was off in his voice. "You okay?" A pause. Then I went back. My stomach twisted. "Back where?" "The alley." I gripped the phone tighter. "What the hell were you thinking?" I had to know," he said. "It's bigger now. He hesitated. "It's not just an alley anymore. It's spreading down the street." The hairs on my arms rose. "And it's louder now," Dave continued. That stopped me cold. "Louder," I repeated. "What do you mean?" "The silence," he said. "It's not just nothing anymore. There's something in it. Pressure. A weight. Like it's..." He trailed off. "Like it's alive?" I whispered. Dave didn't answer right away. Finally, he said, "Yeah." I swallowed. "Dave, listen to me. We need to stay the hell away from that place." He let out a short, humorless laugh. "I don't think it matters, man. I don't think we can stop it." His words made my skin crawl, because deep down I knew he was right. The evacuation orders. By late afternoon, things escalated. New emergency alerts came through. Emergency alert. Certain areas are now under mandatory evacuation. Federal teams are enacting containment measures. Do not resist evacuation orders. The alerts listed street names, blocks of neighborhoods. I wasn't in the affected area. Not yet, but Dave's apartment was. I called him again. No answer. I tried twice more. Still nothing. Panic set in. I grabbed my keys and drove. The wrong turn. I shouldn't have gone alone. The roads were eerily empty the closer I got to Dave's neighborhood. No cars. No people. Just that heavy, pressing quiet. Then I saw the first checkpoint. Black SUVs. Government vehicles. Men in dark uniforms standing near barricades. No identifiable badges. Just Federal Response Team printed across their vests. I slowed down. One of them stepped forward, holding up a hand. I rolled down my window. "Hey, my friend lives up ahead. I just need to." "No access," the man said. His voice was flat, unnaturally calm. I glanced past him. The entire block was gone. Not in a physical sense. The buildings were still there, the streets still intact. But there was no movement, no lights, no sound. A creeping darkness hung over the area, like the world itself was being drained. The man leaned down slightly. "You need to turn around," he said. I met his eyes, and for the first time I saw it. The silence was inside him, a deadness behind his stare, a cold, empty void where a person should have been. I put the car in reverse, and I got the hell out of there. Missing. I kept trying Dave's phone that night. No answer. His apartment number was disconnected. By the next morning, his place was gone from the city database. No rental history, no utility records, like he never existed. That was the same day the final emergency alert came through. Final emergency alert. Certain areas are now permanently restricted. Do not attempt to enter. Do not approach. This is your final warning. They stopped talking about the missing people after that. Stopped reporting on the quarantines. The city moved on, like nothing ever happened. One last message. A week later, I got a text from Dave's number, but it wasn't him. "It's not quiet in here. It's so loud." That was the last thing I ever heard from him. And when I tried to call back, his number was gone. It's been 2 weeks since Dave disappeared. I haven't told anyone what really happened. Not that it would matter. No one seems to remember him. It started small. His landlord claiming the apartment was never rented to a Dave Carter. His name missing from company payroll records. Then people we both knew, coworkers, old friends, stopped acknowledging he ever existed. I asked Kevin, a guy we both used to grab drinks with, if he had heard from Dave lately. Who? It was like speaking a name that had no meaning anymore. That was the moment I realized whatever was behind the silent zones didn't just take people. It erased them. Something's watching me. First, I tried to push it all down. Pretend I hadn't seen what I saw, but I can feel it. There's something watching me. When I walk down my apartment hallway at night, I swear I hear another set of footsteps, perfectly in sync with mine. My dreams are worse. They're filled with whispers, not words, just layers and layers of garbled, incomprehensible voices. I always wake up drenched in sweat, and for the first few seconds, my room is too quiet, like sound is struggling to return. Breaking into the records. I need answers. Since the government isn't giving them, I have to find them myself. I spend my days scanning forums, tracking down anyone who has information. Most of it is garbage, conspiracies about underground experiments, aliens, some biblical apocalypse. But then I find something buried deep in an obscure thread. A list of anomalous federal activity, and Dave's apartment complex is on it. Not just his, all the recent silent zone locations, hospitals, schools, entire neighborhoods. All of them have one thing in common. They were built near old power grids, just like the alley where this all started. And there's one more entry at the bottom of the list. A decommissioned facility on the outskirts of the city. A place that, until a few years ago, was used for experimental acoustic testing. I don't know why, but I feel it in my gut. This is where it all started. The silent facility. I drive out that night. The location is abandoned, tucked away behind rusted fences and no trespassing signs. The air feels off before I even reach the front gate. It's too still, like the wind is holding its breath. I climb over the fence and land in the overgrown grass. The building looms ahead, covered in graffiti and decay. I force myself forward. The main doors are unlocked. Inside, the silence is thick. No echoes, no creaking floors, just a deep, suffocating absence. There's old lab equipment scattered everywhere. Computers smashed, documents left to rot. I sift through the mess, looking for anything useful. Then, in one of the back offices, I find it. The file. Project Echo Chamber. The experiment. I flip through the pages, scanning fragments of text. The government was testing something here. They had built an anechoic chamber, a room designed to be completely silent. No reflections of sound, no external noise, but they pushed it too far. Instead of just absorbing sound, the room began removing it. Not just inside the chamber, but outside it too. One entry stands out. The phenomenon expands in unpredictable patterns. It feeds on auditory input. The more sound it consumes, the larger the effect. I grip the paper tighter. The silence spreads by absorbing noise. Every time we listen, every time we try to understand it, we're feeding it. My stomach knots as I turn to the last page. A handwritten note, scrawled in messy ink. We never sealed it properly. The anechoic breach is still open. Not alone. A click echoes behind me. I freeze. I'm not alone. Slowly, I turn around. The hallway leading back to the entrance is dark, but something is there. Not a person, not even a shape, just a space where sound refuses to exist. And it's moving toward me. A deep pressure builds in my skull, like my head is being crushed. My heartbeat is too loud. My breath is a deafening roar in my ears. The air distorts. The sound around me collapses into a void. I stumble back, gripping the edge of a desk. I need to get out. I grab the file, shove it into my jacket, and sprint for the door. The silence chases me. I can feel it pressing against my back, closing in like a living thing. I reach the exit, slam into the metal doors, and stumble outside. Noise returns all at once. The wind, the rustling trees, my own ragged breathing. I don't stop running until I'm back at my car. When I finally look back, the building is quiet, but I know it's still in there, and it knows I found out the truth. The final warning. I don't go home. I drive to a motel on the edge of town, lock the door, and spread the files across the bed. The silent zones aren't natural. They were created, and worse, they can't be contained. The final report says the effect isn't just expanding randomly, it's seeking out more sound, looking for more to consume, which means the emergency alerts aren't just warnings, they're delays. The government isn't trying to fix this, they're just trying to slow it down. My hands shake as I pick up my phone. I don't know who to call. The police won't believe me. The government already knows. And Dave is gone. I take a deep breath, open a blank text, and start typing. Not to anyone in particular, just a record, so if I disappear next, someone might know the truth. The silent zones aren't a natural phenomenon. They're an accident, a weapon that can't be controlled. And they're still spreading. If you hear about them in your area, don't just evacuate, leave the city. Because once it reaches you, you won't get a second chance. I stare at the words for a long time, then I hit send. To everyone, a full contact blast. Within seconds, my phone starts vibrating with incoming messages. Some people just reply with, others ignore it. But one number, an unknown sender, sends a message back. Only 3 words. You shouldn't have. The lights in my motel flicker, and outside, the world gets quieter. I didn't sleep that night, not that I even tried. The message, you shouldn't have, kept burning in my mind, repeating in an endless loop. I sat in the dark motel room, clutching my phone, staring at the screen. The air felt wrong, like the room itself was losing its grip on sound. Outside, the motel's neon sign flickered. The hum of the cheap overhead light buzzed softly above me, but every now and then, it would dip, like someone was turning the volume of reality down for just a second. Then it would snap back. I checked my phone again. The message was still there, and then it disappeared. Not just the text, the entire conversation, like it had never happened. I was already on my feet, shoving the documents back into my bag, heart hammering in my chest. I needed to move. Escape plans. I ran through my options. Option 1, go to the police. Not happening. I'd already seen what they did to people who asked too many questions. Option 2, leave the city. It was the smartest choice, but a part of me knew it wouldn't matter. The silent zones weren't bound by city limits. If this was a government accident, there were other sites like the facility I found. It wouldn't stop. Option 3, find someone else who knew the truth. I opened my laptop and went back to the forum, the one where I first found the list of affected locations. But the entire thread was gone. No trace of it. No cached version, like it had never existed. Panic set in. I tried searching for anything, any reference to silent zones, disappearing people, even the weird highway video that had surfaced earlier. Nothing. Every link was broken. Every account that had commented on the original post, deleted. I sat back in the chair, pulse pounding. This wasn't just a cover-up. Something was erasing every trace of it. And if I didn't act fast, it was going to erase me, the stranger who knew too much. A message popped up in my inbox. No sender. No username. Just a single line of text. Meet me at the dead mall. Midnight. You don't have much time. I stared at it. A trap? Probably. But what other choice did I have? The dead mall. I arrived a few minutes before midnight. The place had been shut down for years. A rotting skeleton of a once busy shopping center, now claimed by decay and graffiti. The parking lot was empty. No cars. No lights. No sound. I stepped inside through a side entrance. The air was thick with dust, and my footsteps echoed too loud in the cavernous space. Then movement. A figure stepped from the shadows near the abandoned food court. Hooded, tall, they lifted a hand in greeting. You're louder than I expected, they said. The voice was distorted, like a radio signal just slightly off frequency. Who are you? I asked. They didn't answer. Instead, they pulled something from their pocket and tossed it toward me. Caught it. A flash drive. There's your proof, they said. I turned it over in my hands. Proof of what? What's coming? They said. What's already here? My breath caught. They can't stop it, the figure continued. They can only try to control the damage. And even that is failing. I swallowed. The silent zones, they're not just spreading, they said. They're evolving. My fingers tightened around the flash drive. "What do you mean?" The stranger took a step closer, and for the first time I saw what was wrong with them. Their face was off, not in a monstrous way, not in some grotesque, mutated fashion, but in a way that my brain refused to process, like a missing frame in a film reel, like an absence of something that should have been there. "I'm already gone," they said quietly. Then, before I could respond, they faded, not like walking away, not like running, just vanishing, like their existence was being unraveled in real time. I blinked. The space where they had been was now empty. A chill crawled down my spine. I pocketed the flash drive and ran. The data dump. Back in my motel room, I plugged the flash drive into my laptop. Contained one file, a video. I clicked play. The footage was grainy, surveillance style. A research facility. Not the one I had visited, this one was still operational. Scientists moved around in hazmat suits, monitoring equipment. At the center of the room was a window, a thick pane of glass, revealing something on the other side. First, it was just darkness, then movement. The air inside the chamber warped, not like heat distortion, not like gas, like something was shifting through space itself. The audio crackled. One of the scientists turned to the camera, and that's when I saw it. Their mouth was moving, but there was no sound. They were screaming, but the silence was consuming it. The footage distorted. The video glitched. Then, a final frame, a single sentence, scrawled across the screen in jagged white text. "IT can hear you." Then the video cut to black, and the sound in my motel room died. The wrong kind of silence. I sat frozen. My own breathing sounded distant. The hum of the motel AC had vanished. The ticking clock on the wall was mute. I turned slowly, and the shadows in the corner of the room shifted. The silence was here, with me. I grabbed my bag, shoved the laptop inside, and bolted. Outside, the motel parking lot was wrong. It looked the same, but it was dead, like a paused frame in a movie. I fumbled for my keys, jumped into my car, and slammed the door shut. For a second, everything was still. Then a single sound, not from my car, not from the road, but from inside the silence itself. A voice. "We hear you." I floored the gas pedal, and as I sped down the empty highway, I saw it in my rearview mirror. The silence was following me, and it was getting louder. I didn't stop driving. The highway stretched out ahead, an endless strip of pavement cutting through the dead night. I gripped the wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. The silence was still behind me, not in a way I could see, but I could feel it, like the air was warping, unraveling in the distance. I tried turning on the radio, static. Tried calling someone, anyone, no signal. My world was growing smaller. The hum of my car's engine felt thin, distant, like it wasn't really there anymore. I had to get somewhere with noise, with people, with sound. That's when I saw the gas station, a beacon of neon light in the darkness. I veered off the highway and into the lot, tires screeching against the asphalt. The place looked abandoned, but the lights were still on. And inside, music played softly over the speakers. Sound. I wasn't alone. Not yet. The gas station. I stumbled through the doors, heart pounding. A bored-looking clerk stood behind the counter, scrolling on his phone. His name tag read Eddie. The music playing from the store speakers was some old pop song, warbling and tinny. But it was sound. Real sound. It meant I was safe, for now. I approached the counter, still breathless. Eddie barely looked up. "Hey, I started, voice unsteady. You notice anything weird tonight?" He glanced at me. "You mean besides the sweaty guy who just sprinted in like a serial killer's after him?" I forced a shaky laugh. "Yeah, besides that." Eddie shrugged. "Nah, man. Same old." I swallowed. "Has it been quiet?" At that, he did pause. His fingers hovered over his phone screen. Then he put it down. "Now that you mention it," he said slowly. "Yeah, kinda weirdly quiet." I tensed. "Like earlier?" The highway was dead. No cars. And the radio's been acting up. Keeps cutting out. A chill ran through me. He frowned, rubbing his chin. "Even now, actually." My stomach clenched. "What?" He pointed up. To the store speakers. The music had stopped. I hadn't even noticed. The air thickened. The silence was creeping in. Collapse. Eddie tapped the screen on his phone. "Weird. No service. I took a step back. Outside, the night seemed darker than before. Still, like something had swallowed the usual background noise. Eddie must have noticed my expression. Dude, you good? I licked my lips. We need to leave. He blinked. Huh, I'm serious, I said, voice low. Something is coming. A pressure built in my skull. The lights flickered. Eddie's phone screen glitched. Then the security cameras cut out. One by one, the monitors behind the counter blinked to static. Then the registers, the fluorescent lights overhead. Every electrical device in the store died. Eddie looked around. Okay, what the hell? The silence hit, like a vacuum sucking the air from the room. The world muffled. I could still see Eddie's mouth moving, but I couldn't hear him. The sound was being erased. The only thing left was the ringing in my ears, a deep, suffocating pressure. Then movement outside, something shifting in the dark, something watching. I grabbed Eddie's arm. We need to go. The wrong kind of sound. We sprinted for the door. Outside, the gas station lot stretched into nothingness. The highway was gone, swallowed by the quiet. No wind, no rustling trees, no hum of distant traffic, just the void. And in the middle of that void, a figure. It wasn't a person, not really. It had the shape of one. A humanoid outline standing perfectly still. But there were no details, no face, no features, just an absence, like a cutout in reality. Eddie saw it too. What the figure moved, not by stepping forward, just shifting. 1 second it was 10 feet away. The next it was 5. The pressure in my skull spiked. Eddie clutched his head. Shit. What is that? I backed away. Don't let it get close. The figure twitched. Sound collapsed around it. The neon lights flickered, then shattered. Glass rained down, but it made no noise. The figure tilted its head. It was listening. Eddie was shaking. This isn't real, man. This isn't. He was too loud. The figure twitched closer. The space where Eddie had been standing just a second ago distorted, like reality itself had been compressed. I grabbed his arm and yanked him back. Shut up. We ran. The last station. The only safe place now was the car. We dove inside and slammed the doors shut. I turned the key, praying the engine would still work. For a terrible second, nothing. Then a spark of life. The engine roared to life. Sound. Real, tangible sound. Eddie gasped. Holy shit. Holy shit. I peeled out of the lot. The gas station disappeared into the silent abyss behind us. The figure didn't follow. Not this time. Nowhere is safe. We drove in silence. Not because we wanted to, but because neither of us knew what to say. Eddie was shaking. His fingers gripped his knees, his breath ragged. I kept my eyes on the road. The highway was back now. Normal. But I knew it wasn't. None of this was. Finally, Eddie spoke. You know what's going on, don't you? I exhaled. I told him everything. The emergency alerts. The disappearing people. The voids. The government experiment that started all of this. Eddie didn't say anything for a long time. Then he whispered, so we're screwed, huh? I didn't answer, because I wasn't sure anymore. All I knew was this. The silent zones weren't just expanding. They were learning. And no matter how far we ran, they were always listening. The silence wasn't finished with us. I knew that the moment I looked in the rearview mirror, the figure was still there, not following the car in the way something normal would. It didn't run. It didn't move in a way my brain could process. It just was. 1 second, the highway behind us was empty. The next, it was there, closer, a patch of absolute nothingness, cutting through the real world. I forced my eyes back to the road, gripping the wheel so hard my fingers ached. Eddie sat beside me, shaking, his breath shallow. He hadn't said a word since I told him the truth. I didn't blame him. What do you even say to something like this? That the world we knew, the world we trusted, was already breaking apart? That we weren't running from a person or a creature. We were running from the absence of sound itself. The highway stretched on. My head ached. The pressure was still there, curling behind my ears, threatening to crush my skull from the inside. I didn't know how much longer I could keep going. And then I saw it. A sign on the side of the road. Rest stop, 2 miles. I made a split-second decision. It was a risk, but we couldn't drive forever. We needed to stop, to think, to figure out what the hell to do next. I didn't know if we had a plan, but I knew one thing: we couldn't keep running forever. Rest stop refuge. The place looked abandoned. A small, run-down building sitting at the edge of a dark, overgrown parking lot. A few vending machines sat outside, their lights flickering weakly. A single car was parked near the entrance, an old, beat-up sedan. That meant someone else was here. I wasn't sure if that was a good thing. Eddie was still shaking as we stepped out of the car. His hands were clenching and unclenching at his sides, like he was trying to ground himself. "You sure about this?" he whispered. "No, but we didn't have many options left." I pushed open the door. Inside, the rest stop was dimly lit. Rows of vending machines lined one wall, humming faintly. A few cracked leather chairs sat near a long-forgotten magazine rack. And at the counter, a man, middle-aged, unshaven, wearing a trucker's cap and a heavy jacket. He turned as we entered, eyes narrowing. "You're running, aren't you?" he said. My stomach dropped. Eddie tensed. "What?" The man exhaled, rubbing his temples. "I've seen it before," he muttered. "People coming in here, looking over their shoulders, running from something they can't explain." His voice was tired, like he had been dealing with this for a long time. I swallowed hard. "You know about them." The man let out a dry laugh. "Son," he said, "I've been dealing with this for years." The ones who knew. The man's name was Frank, and he had been on the run for a long time. "I used to work for the government," he said, cracking open a can of soda. "Not in the lab coat way. I was just security. But I saw things I shouldn't have." He gestured for us to sit. Eddie hesitated, but I lowered myself into one of the cracked chairs. "What did you see?" I asked. Frank took a slow sip. Then he said the words that changed everything. "It started with sound." The room felt colder. "Back in the 80s, he continued, "there was a project. One of those black budget types. The goal was simple: to manipulate sound at a fundamental level." He tapped his fingers on the counter. "Not just noise, not just vibrations, but the actual presence of sound itself." Eddie shifted uncomfortably. "That doesn't make sense." Frank gave him a grim smile. "That's what we thought too." He leaned forward. "They found something," he said. "Or maybe they made something. A frequency that wasn't a frequency. A sound that wasn't a sound." I felt my stomach twist. Frank's eyes darkened. "And the moment they played it, they couldn't stop it." The first silence. Frank pulled something from his jacket pocket. A small cassette tape, old and worn with no label. "This," he said, holding it up, "is a recording of the first test." I stared at it. A deep, primal part of me didn't want to hear it, but I had to ask, "What happened?" Frank hesitated. Then he set the tape down. "They played the sound," he said. "At first it was nothing, a low hum, but then the room got quieter." Eddie and I exchanged glances. Frank's voice dropped to a whisper. Not just normal quiet, not like a soundproof room. It was like sound itself was being erased. He swallowed. "Then the researchers started to fade. The room felt too small." "Not all at once," Frank continued, "but piece by piece. Like parts of them were out of sync." I could hear Eddie's breathing quicken. Frank clenched his jaw. "The only reason I'm still here is because I ran before the silence reached me." He leaned back. "And I've been running ever since." A final warning. I was shaking. The silent zones weren't an accident. They weren't random. They were the result of something humanity created. Something we never should have touched. I glanced at the tape. It sat on the table between us, humming with a terrible potential. Eddie wiped a hand down his face. "So what now?" Frank exhaled. "You have two choices," he said. "Keep running like me." He met my eyes. "Or try to stop it." A heavy silence settled over the room. I felt the weight of the decision pressing down on me. Try to fight something I didn't understand, or live the rest of my life on the run. But then the lights flickered. The vending machines hummed off-key. And outside, the air shifted. A deep, crushing silence pressed against the windows. Frank's eyes darkened. "They found us." And just like that, the sound died. The sound died, not in the way it does when a power outage cuts the hum of electricity, or when a heavy snowfall blankets the world. This was different, deeper. It was like the entire concept of noise had been ripped away. The hum of the vending machines? Gone. The buzz of the lights? Gone. Even my own heartbeat muted. I could still feel my pulse hammering in my chest, but it made no sound. Eddie's mouth moved, forming a frantic, silent "what the hell?" Frank had already drawn his gun. Not that it would help. Outside, the darkness shifted. Something was there. Something that had been waiting for us to stop running. The silent ones. Frank gestured sharply for us to move. We sprinted toward the back of the rest stop, past rows of dusty shelves and broken vending machines. Our footsteps should have echoed, but they didn't. The whole world had been swallowed. I could feel my breath rasping in my throat, but I couldn't hear it. The pressure in my skull built, a deep, crushing force, as if something was pushing inward from all sides. Eddie stumbled beside me, clutching his ears, his face twisted in pain. Frank grabbed my shoulder. His lips moved. "Don't let it touch you." Then a shape appeared at the entrance. The same featureless void I had seen at the gas station. Person-shaped nothingness. But now there were more. 3, 4, 5, all standing motionless in the doorway. Then they moved, not by walking, not by stepping forward. They just shifted. One moment they were across the room, the next only feet away. Frank raised his gun, fired. The gunshot should have been deafening in the small space, but there was nothing, just silence. The bullet disappeared the moment it left the barrel, like it had been erased. Frank's face twisted in panic. He fired again and again. The bullets never landed. They never made a sound. They simply ceased to exist. The figures stood still, listening, waiting. Then they began to close the distance. Escape or erasure. Run. Frank didn't need to say it. We bolted toward the back door, but the air was getting heavy. The closer the figures came, the thicker everything became, like we were running through an invisible force pressing inward. My legs felt sluggish. Eddie tripped, slamming into a shelf. He groaned, but no sound came out. I yanked him to his feet. Frank was ahead of us, throwing his full weight into the emergency exit door. It didn't budge. His face twisted in frustration. He stepped back, aiming his gun at the lock, then stopped. It wouldn't work. We had already seen what happened to bullets here. Frank looked around, eyes darting. Then he grabbed the tape, the old cassette tape, the recording of the first silence, the only thing left from the beginning. I didn't understand at first, but then I saw what he saw. The figures had paused. They weren't advancing, not anymore. They were watching the tape, or listening to it, even though it wasn't playing. It was the only thing in the room that had a sound. Frank locked eyes with me, and I understood. This was the key. The only thing keeping them from taking the last of us. A desperate gamble. Frank grabbed my hand, shoving the tape into my palm. His lips moved. "Run." I shook my head. "No, we all go." His grip tightened. "You have to get out." Eddie was barely standing. The silence was crushing him, crushing all of us. Frank glanced at the figures. Then he made his choice. He turned and charged straight at them. I lunged forward to stop him, but I was too slow. Frank slammed into the closest figure. For a single, terrible second, reality buckled. Frank's body twisted. Not physically, not in any way that made sense, but in a way I can't describe. Like part of him had been removed. He didn't scream, couldn't. He just vanished, erased from existence, like he had never been there at all. I staggered back, the tape still clutched in my hand. Eddie grabbed my sleeve, his eyes wide and panicked. He mouthed, "Go." I didn't argue, breaking the silence. We burst out the emergency exit. This time it opened, not because we had unlocked it, but because the silent ones didn't care about doors. They were letting us go, because we had the tape, because we had the only sound left. We sprinted across the dark parking lot, gasping for breath. The car was still there, but I knew this wasn't over. The silent ones didn't chase us. They didn't need to. I could feel their presence lingering, watching. They weren't after us. They were after the recording. And I didn't know why, but I knew one thing. We had something they wanted, something they had spent decades trying to erase. And now we were the last ones who could stop them. We didn't stop driving. The rest stop faded behind us, swallowed by the quiet void we had barely escaped. Frank was gone, just gone, erased like he had never existed. I gripped the wheel with white-knuckled hands, forcing myself to focus on the road. Eddie was curled up in the passenger seat, his head in his hands. He hadn't said a word since we left. Not that I blamed him. The world as we knew it had broken apart. The silent ones weren't just creatures. They were something bigger, something that didn't just kill you. It erased you, and now I was holding the only thing left that could stop them. A single, battered cassette tape. Frank had died for it, and I still didn't understand why. The unheard sound. The highway stretched endlessly in front of us, empty and dark. The world felt too quiet, even though the car engine was still humming. Even though my own breath still rasped in my throat, it was like the silence was growing around us, spreading. I glanced down at the tape in my lap. It didn't look special, just an old, unlabeled cassette. But Frank had given his life for it. I had to know why. Eddie finally stirred beside me. His voice was hoarse. What are we supposed to do? I didn't have an answer. The government knew about this. The silent zones were proof of that. This wasn't some random supernatural phenomenon. This was a containment, which meant someone somewhere knew how to stop it. And I had a feeling that whatever was on this tape, it was the key, the lost frequency. We had driven for nearly an hour when I made my decision. We need to listen to it. Eddie's head snapped toward me. What? The tape? I said, gripping the wheel. We need to hear what's on it. Eddie looked horrified. Are you insane? I wasn't sure, but I knew one thing: I wasn't going to keep running blind. I pulled into the parking lot of an abandoned gas station. The place was gutted, windows shattered, roof partially caved in. It didn't matter. We weren't here for supplies. We were here for answers. I grabbed the tape and dug through the glove compartment. Old receipts, a flashlight, a couple of spare batteries, and cassette player, a cheap battery-powered one. I exhaled shakily. Eddie looked at me like I was holding a live grenade. This is a bad idea, he muttered. I didn't disagree, but I slid the tape into the player anyway and pressed play. The first recording, the cassette word. For a few seconds, there was nothing. Then a hum, low, distant, almost too quiet to notice. But as it played, something shifted. The air felt thicker. Eddie inhaled sharply. His hands flew to his ears. I clenched my jaw and forced myself to keep listening. The hum grew deeper, and then a voice, old, warped, barely above a whisper. If you can hear this, you're already infected. Eddie made a strangled sound and slapped the stop button. The recording cut off. The world lurched, like reality itself had skipped. The car engine hiccuped. The lights of the gas station flickered. For a moment, I thought we had made a mistake, but then the sounds came rushing back. The static of the radio, the creak of the car frame, my own ragged breath. It was like we had been submerged underwater without realizing it. And the moment the recording stopped, we had surfaced. The silence had been creeping in, and the tape had pushed it back. Eddie was shaking. What the hell was that? I rewound the tape, pressed play again. The voice returned, crackling through the tiny speaker. If you can hear this, you're already infected. You need to fight it. You need to remember the sound. I held my breath. They came through a frequency. The voice trembled. A sound that wasn't a sound. A frequency that shouldn't exist. It spread like radiation, like a sickness. And once you've been exposed, silence, then you start to fade. The voice wavered. If you don't counteract it, you'll be erased. I felt my stomach drop. This wasn't just about avoiding them. The silence was something that grew inside of you. A sickness, a virus made of absence. And if you didn't stop it, consumed you, just like it had consumed Frank. A war of sound. I rewound the tape again, pressing play with shaking fingers. There's only one way to fight back, the voice said. You need to override it. Drown it out. Fill the space with sound. Eddie's eyes widened. That's why they want the tape. I nodded. This recording was a weapon, a way to push back the silence. And they knew it. That's why the silent ones had stopped chasing us. They didn't need to kill us. They just needed to take the recording. And then the voice spoke again. This is the first recording, the first test. But it isn't enough. You need the rest. My heart pounded. There were more tapes, More recordings. The voice rattled on. The signal is buried. Hidden. You have to find it before it's too late. I felt cold all over. Go to station. The voice cut off. The tape stopped. I yanked it out, staring at the plastic casing like it could somehow give me the rest of the message. The location was missing, but I knew now this wasn't the only tape. And if we wanted to survive, if we wanted to stop this, we had to find the rest. I turned to Eddie. We're not running anymore. His throat bobbed. Then what the hell are we doing? I looked out at the dark highway ahead of us. We're going to find the signal. We weren't just fighting for our own lives anymore. We were fighting for the last sound left in the world. And I wasn't going to let it be erased. We weren't alone. The moment I said the words, "We're going to find the signal," I felt it. Something watching, something listening. Eddie's hands were still shaking, his breath shallow. But he nodded. Okay, he was scared. So was I, but we couldn't stop. Not now. We had one piece of the puzzle. And if we didn't find the rest, we were as good as erased. Dead frequencies. I slammed the car into drive and peeled out of the gas station parking lot. The radio crackled. Static, deep and distorted. I hadn't touched it, neither had Eddie, but the dial was turning on its own. Click, click, click. Each shift of the knob sent a burst of white noise through the speakers. I clenched the wheel tighter. It's them, Eddie swallowed. Trying to stop us? Or, I exhaled. Trying to guide us. I turned the volume up. The static deepened. Somewhere underneath, a sound, warped and distant. A melody. I turned to Eddie. His eyes widened. It's the same sound from the tape. I nodded. This wasn't random. It was leading us. Station 19. The voice on the tape had cut off before it could tell us where to go. But I had heard one word. Station. I took a deep breath and muttered, "Radio station." Eddie sat up straighter. The old broadcast tower. I knew the one. It sat just outside of town, abandoned for decades. And if this was about frequencies, about sounds that shouldn't exist, it made sense that the answer would be there. I slammed my foot on the gas. The radio static grew louder, like the signal was waiting for us. A tower in the dark. We reached the station just after midnight. The place was a skeleton of what it once was. A rusted tower loomed over the main building, its antenna barely standing. The door hung open. Eddie hesitated. They already know we're here. I knew it too, but we had come too far to turn back. We stepped inside. The final tape. The air was heavy. Every breath felt thick, like we were wading through something unseen. Shelves of old equipment lined the walls. Dust-covered consoles. Dead monitors. And at the center of it all, a single cassette player, already loaded. Eddie exhaled. This is it. I pressed play. The truth. The same voice crackled through the speaker. Old. Fractured. Desperate. If you found this, it's already too late. I swallowed. You were exposed the moment you heard it. The moment the silence touched you. The hum returned. Low. Vibrating through the walls. They are not creatures. They are not beings. They are the absence of sound itself. Eddie's breath hitched. The world is held together by noise, by frequency, by the vibrations of existence itself. The static deepened. They are erasing it. I clenched my fists, and once they erase enough, there will be nothing left. The tape skipped. Then, you have one chance. The voice shifted. It wasn't a recording anymore. It was live. You need to override them. Eddie and I exchanged a panicked glance. Live? Who was speaking? And then, play the sound. Make them hear it. Broadcast it. The radio tower. That's why we were here. The only way to fight them was to drown them out. I shot toward the old control board, slamming my hands on the console. Eddie fumbled with the tape. How do we? I flipped the main switch. The tower whined. The hum outside shuddered. They knew what we were doing, and they were coming. The broadcast. The tape spun. The speakers crackled. And then the sound erupted. The frequency poured from the speakers, climbing the tower, blasting into the night. The walls trembled. The hum outside turned to a shriek. They were screaming. Eddie gritted his teeth. It's working. I held my breath. The world shook. The station lights flickered. The air pushed inward. A final, desperate attempt to erase us. But we didn't stop. We let the sound consume everything. And then, a snap, like reality had been stretched too thin and finally broke. The The pressure vanished. The silence was gone. And for the first time in hours, the world was loud again. The aftermath. We stumbled outside, gasping for air. The night was normal. Crickets, wind, the distant rumble of cars on the highway. No hum, no figures. Eddie wiped his face, shaking. Did we? I didn't know. We had pushed them back. But was it permanent? I turned back to the station. The cassette was still playing. The last sound. We had won this fight, but the war wasn't over. Because if this had happened before, could happen again. I took a deep breath, and for the first time in a long time, I was grateful to hear it.